Happy May the 4th, and welcome everybody to another episode of the Lunch Table Podcast. And in this very special episode, we're going to revisit the original trilogy from Star Wars. We are such dedicated and hardcore fans of the franchise, and we can't wait to get into it. So this is the first part of a 2 or 3 part series. We're going to revisit the prequels and also the sequels. Without further ado, Dylan, let's get started.
You know, we talk a lot of Star Wars on this channel, but I'm glad that we're going back to our roots with the original trilogy, because I feel like the original trilogy has not been slept on, but I feel like there have been so many new kind of IPs with the Star Wars franchise now. It's kind of refreshing to go back and rewatch it now and then, right? It's like one of those cult movies, like you watch like The Godfather or like the original Alien, right? It just added so much to cinematic history, and the original trilogy was like one of those groundbreaking movies, right? And it just kind of paved the way for like what movies and stories should be, right? There is such a lightheartedness to the original trilogy. They just had like, I don't know, they're goofy moments, but it doesn't become mediocre, and it's a nice balance between like the action and the drama. Maybe now rewatching it might be a little bit slower to watch compared to some of the newer movies, but it still has this uniqueness about it where it feels like you're watching like an Arthurian mythology or something, right? But yeah, what were your thoughts on the Under trilogy?
For sure, it's a product of its time, and when I say that, I mean in the acting, perhaps maybe a little bit of the storytelling, but even that, I think that transcended what a lot of sci-fi films were back in the day. The setting that was built, it's the foundation, you know, it's so iconic, and we don't see anything like that, because now sci-fi movies, there's a lot of comparisons to Blade Runner, mostly, right? And that's the approach they take. There's some movies that perhaps will seem very similar to Star Wars, like Dune, right? But for the most part, this is something that I think will never go away. It's a beautiful thing when you have this huge, grand idea and it builds a franchise. We'll go a little bit later into how that franchise has kind of diminished a little bit later on. But for the most part, this is the genre, this is the tone. And so when you are the first to make that, I think that's something that'll live forever. Really beautiful. And again, George Lucas, he's the godfather. He's the creator, and we wouldn't be here without him, you know? So that idea came to be, and he just started off making movies too. So I think it was really inspiring what he accomplished.
Yeah, a long time ago when I was younger, I actually wanted to be like a filmmaker. I mean, my aspirations change over the years, but I think I always came back to Star Wars in that regard, because it's one of those movies like you can rewatch over and over again and still appreciate it every time. You can recite, you know, the dialogue word for word. How many memes and jokes have we made sometimes just referring back to the original trilogy, right? The visual effects still blow my mind to this day. I mean, there's really groundbreaking stuff with Industrial Light and Magic did, and it still holds up to this day. And it most of it was practical, and that's the crazy part, right? I think we're so, you know, used to CGI now, and with stagecraft now, it's even more hyper realistic. But something about the effects of the original trilogy just seem to, I don't know, just make it believable, right, for what it was.
Yeah, it did. Sorry. So no, absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about the casting, because Mark Hamill is a phenomenal actor, a very talented voice actor. We see Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, of course, the iconic Carrie Fisher, Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think they James Earl Jones. I think they set the stage for how the character archetypes, right? The original trilogy, the character archetypes are in the rest of the franchise. So let me get your thoughts on just the characters.
They had such a great chemistry together. I think if they didn't nail that down, it would have been a different movie. But they were, just from the start, you could already tell, like, they kind of, and remember at the time they had a lot of issues filming this movie. A lot of people had doubts about it. But when I rewatched like documentaries and just seeing like how they were like on screen as young actors, it's just really like heartwarming to see them, grow with this franchise. And now it's like they still have a love and appreciation for it. And of course, rest in peace to Carrie Fisher. She actually passed away on my birthday. It was like the sad moment for me. Yeah, and of course the supporting actors as well, like Anthony Daniels, Peter Cushing as Governor Tarkin. They just kind of add this nuance and refinement. And even Alec Guinness, he's a fucking Shakespearean thespian, right? Like, who would have thought like adding him could just add so much more. And especially now because Obi-Wan is such a beloved character now. But that performance, that's what really, that's the Obi-Wan that we remember, right? Even if Ewan is popular, Ewan took a lot of Alec Guinness's performance. He kind of incorporated a lot of those mannerisms into his own portrayal, right? So yeah, the cast is of course phenomenal. Even David Prowse, I think he doesn't get enough recognition as Darth Vader. I think there was that one documentary where he had like a lot of issues with Lucasfilm, but I mean his method acting and action performances just added to that, kind of what we think of Darth Vader, right? The very cold, staunch look, right? The very just evil mannerisms that he had, right?
Now, before we get into the nitty gritty of metaphor and deeper meanings, I want to touch on the music by John Williams. Of course, the iconic, beautiful music. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, John Williams, he is a musical genius. He is the Kanye West of orchestra music. Yeah. But no, yeah, I'm serious. Like, John Williams crafted something that, is just so iconic. And, there's only like few composers that can really like match his way of crafting a theme and making it as important as the characters themselves, right? Because when we think of Star Wars, the first thing we probably think of is probably the soundtrack, right? The like the opening crawl, the Imperial March. Those are characters in themselves, right? We see those recurring themes play in like Clone Wars and Mandalorian, right? The sequels incorporated bits of the original soundtrack too. I'll tell you what, my favorite song from the original soundtrack is Yoda's theme. I think that is one of the most important pieces of music soundtrack history ever.
Oh no, I would agree. I would agree. I love how the music, of course, it's a big franchise. It has a soul to it. So in a way, it feels maybe it's different that Star Wars came out in 1977, and basically we kind of in a way just got into Star Wars, right? If you think about it, because we were around with the prequels, and that was our first exposure, and then actually going to the movie theaters was the sequels, and like I actually remember and everything. But there's such a huge legacy. I wonder how people felt back in the day listening to the music. Now though, it's as if like a family member when you listen to it. It's kind of weird. It's so familiar. It's like listening to waves in an ocean. I swear. Yeah, it's so familiar. It's like, oh yeah, that's Star Wars.
It fills you with so much emotion when you listen to it. It's like it makes you want to cry sometimes watching. Like, there are certain movies where like sometimes they actually don't use much of the soundtrack. I think Star Wars would have been a completely different movie if they didn't incorporate the music in this. It would still would have been effective, but the music, like I said, is such an important component in portraying these characters, right?
And what gets me is being older, because again, I wasn't around with the prequels, but seeing the sequels, what got me, what made me feel kind of like to tear up. And the sequel's the only thing, I guess, is the opening crawl and that song, because I thought about how many people have experienced Star Wars for years, and now I'm finally a part of that group, and just seeing that for the first time, it's a very joyous moment, and that you can't get that from anybody else except for John Williams. He's just that guy. And I mean, he did Indiana Jones, Jaws, he's just so epic. He's that guy that I think a lot of composers back in the day, they always looked up to. Like, I probably would imagine Hans Zimmer and people like that.
Right.
They got all of the aspiration, I guess, from John Williams. He's like a pioneer in that. So it's a beautiful thing that he was a part of Star Wars, integral to it.
For sure.
Yeah. But
Well, let me ask you. They actually re-released Return of the Jedi in theaters recently. For people that haven't or want to experience in the theater. But I want to ask you, what was your first experience with the original trilogy as
My
a young
first
kid?
experience was when, sometimes when it's kind of cringe, but like sometimes when you're like a nerd or a geek, you kind of have to stumble your way into that, right? No one's going to really teach you how to be like that. And when I wanted to get exposed to Star Wars, I did want to get exposed to Star Wars because I knew it was an iconic. So back in the day, Netflix had their DVD rentals, and so you would go on their website
Ah,
and you'll get it. And I remember I would get the original trilogy. I had to find out how to watch them in order. That's how like
mm.
new I was to Star Wars. And I saw these like stupid kind of covers they did, because you know how sometimes they update the covers or like the posters, but they do it like
Right.
cheaply. I saw the branding for the
Mm.
original, and I was like, oh, okay, let me go back to this, because the first Star Wars movie I watched was Revenge of the Sith, but I never really got into
Mm.
Star Wars after that. And I said, let me rewatch stuff. So I went back. I was so shocked that it looked so old, and I didn't even realize that it was from 1970.
Mhm.
Um, and after I seen that, I fell immediately in love with the original. The original feels very different from the prequel in a sense. It feels like it's weird because it's super familiar. That's the setting. It's like there's stuff that happened in the past. Yeah, it does feel very groundbreaking. Like they're on new territory here, and
Mhm.
so there's something very refreshing about that. Just the way how they approach many things. So that was my first exposure to it. What about yours?
It's hard to pinpoint my first experience. I think the first Star Wars movie that I watched may have been Phantom Menace. I remember I had a hard copy on a 2 disc
Hmm.
DVD. Um, but I remember my local Blockbuster always had, the VHS tapes with the original trilogy. Sometimes they would bundle it with that, yeah, you ever see like the bundle with the
Mm-hmm.
3 Star Wars trilogies movies, and it's like Luke going like that with the
Yeah.
lightsaber. Um, I think maybe the first original trilogy I watched was New Hope, and then I just kind of watched it in order. And yeah, I just remember just falling in love with the characters. I always liked Darth Vader. He was always like I always kind of rooted for the bad guy. Just he looked so like cool as a villain. The stormtroopers were cool. Now they kind of like stupid, but back then they were like really cool looking. Um, the droids were awesome. Everything was just so believable. It's like walking into like this world, and it's like what Obi-Wan says, like you've taken your first step into a larger world, right? And
Mm.
it was really my first experience with like just movies and narratology now. And looking back, it kind of like influenced the way that I see movies now, and how I kind of perceive creativity in a way. So yeah, they were just great movies to watch, and I would always rewatch them and even recite, like I said, like the quotes. And sometimes my family would get annoyed because I would just like say the lines before they would even like say the words themselves. Yeah.
Now we said our piece about that. Let's talk a little bit about the overall design, because the design has a deeper meaning. For example, Darth Vader's helmet looks a lot like the Nazi helmets.
Hmm.
There's a lot of deeper meaning, and there's some real possible elements that has to do with like science. I remember they used to have documentaries on like how to make cars levitate, and you have to use
Hmm.
copper streets or whatever and magnets and whatnot. Let's get into the nitty gritty of the deeper meaning of the original trilogy.
Yeah, I love how they designed it. And if anybody doesn't know, like George Lucas's original draft or concept for Star Wars was very more akin to Flash Gordon. They were very like outlandish looking, and it felt more sci-fi than space western. I think there's actually a comic now where they actually adapted that style, and I always thought it was so cool. But yeah, they took a lot of modern elements from the time, and if you think about it, it was the 70s. It wasn't that far off from like the Vietnam, World War II. So they kind of took those elements and brought it into this space opera. And yeah, there are a lot of allegories. Like the Death Star is, I think, was like an allegory for like nuclear weapons at the time. It was like the ultimate weapon. Yeah, Darth Vader kind of had like symbolisms of like fascism, and also like his samurai design. Obi-Wan too kind of is like the wise old like Merlin character. as well. Princess Leia is like, of course, the damsel in distress, but with a twist where she kind of is more prone to action and she can actually like defend herself as well. And of course, Luke is like the archetypal like hero's journey as well.
Oh yeah, even like it's just white robes. Ralph McQuarrie is a genius, and seriously, the design, the look, everything wouldn't come to be without him. So it's really interesting. You see like the person who designed the xenomorphs, and like you've seen like all these concept arts, and it's like really weird, it's really groundbreaking. It's almost abstract. It's really weird. And then you see for Star Wars, it's something that seems like as if you're on an acid trip. It's like one of those old things that you'll see like in the side of a bus or like a van, and like that guy does like a lot of mushrooms, and you see like these wizards and whatnot. It's crazy, but I love how they adapt the concept art to make it authentic. Everything is like worn down as well. In a way, some stuff are kind of streamlined, but some stuff are very utilitarian. It's really interesting how the stormtroopers. Yeah, stormtroopers are white. It's kind of like this false hope that the Empire is trying to give people. They're like the knights in shining armor, but they're very skeletalized. And we'll see a little bit later on with the Final Order that they're more like muscled. They look really weird, right? I just love the way how they keep adapting the looks. And it's a really unique thing, especially in Star Wars. I mean, again, you could look at a Star Wars character, you could say like, oh, that's Star Wars. You wouldn't even mix it up with Star Trek. You'll just say, oh yeah, that's Star Wars. That's Star Wars.
Yeah, even the creature designs are so iconic, like the Rancor and the the Pita Carcoon from Tatooine. I think there's just something about this, like you said, it's very Star Wars. Like you can just tell right from the get go. It's part practical, but also part magic as well. Just seeing, I think everybody remembers the Tatooine Cantina scene, right? I think that's what sets the tone for Star Wars, apart from other franchises, where at least back in the day, I think nobody thought of making aliens very like a casual thing, right? Like you could walk into a bar and see like a dude with like 8 eyes or 3 heads, like smoking a cigarette or some shit.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think of like Independence Day or like War of the Worlds. Like you think of aliens as like invaders, but like here it's like aliens are like friends or buddies or whatever, or even comrades in like wartime. So and droids as well. Like they made droids like these very kind of like housemaids. Like if you think of like retrofuturism, they made like droids kind of subservient, but the droids also have their own personalities, like we see with R2 and C3PO. They're very open dialogue, and they have their own thoughts and opinions on things, right? Even if they're programmed that way, they just kind of add to like the humor and the childness of Star Wars.
Yeah, I love it. I love the creature design. I love all the designs here. It's really interesting that all the aliens are like those bad guys from medieval movies where they're like raping and pillaging people, and they're like they're always like laughing. They're like no matter what you give them bad news, they're like always laughing. It's like, wow, you guys are so happy. I want to be a part of your group. Yeah,
it's so funny.
Yeah.
Well, going into kind of the bigger themes, I guess, like what do you think separates the original trilogy from other sci-fi? I say sci-fi movies because I think sci-fi, when we talk about sci-fi, it's a very specific niche category, but I think Star Wars kind of separates itself from that category. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's destiny, fate. It's really interesting that it started 4, 5, 6, and then later we got 1, 2, 3, and a sequel is really interesting. It's like I never seen that. I still never seen that before. I don't see anybody doing that. So that something happened before, and just that big idea, like something happened before, you come from a bigger part of what happened. I mean, this kid just came from a farm, and then all of a sudden he was thrown into this, but it's like fate coming together. So it's kind of meta too, because without Ralph McQuarrie, without John Williams, without George Lucas, without all these people, it's like fate brought them together to create this thing that is forever iconic and ruined by Disney, but forever iconic. It's something that it's more than just a movie. I mean, it's truly cinema. It's kind of cringe to say that after Martin Scorsese said that, but it truly is. There's something so filmic about it, about this tale, that it does feel medieval. It feels almost biblical in a sense. I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah.
No, good points. Yeah. I think for me, I've never seen a sci-fi movie incorporate so many religious ideology in a way. Because the Force is, of course, a big theme, and faith is like a big theme as well. And to kind of make that into this kind of hyper realistic space opera, it's really interesting, and it makes it, like I said, it sets itself apart from what we've seen like with Aliens or Independence Day, right? Or like Close Encounters, right? It's more like in those movies, I say it's more about the actual technology or the creatures. In Star Wars, it's more about the intertextuality, right? Everybody in Star Wars is just a kind of cog in the wheel to kind of portray these bigger themes, right? And I still believe that, not even now with some of the newer properties, like especially Mandalorian, I think a lot of characters and ship designs and everything about them is a puzzle piece in a bigger picture, right? And that's what I love about Star Wars, is because you can kind of rewatch it and kind of see something more out of it than just a 2-hour movie about some dudes sword fighting with lasers, right? You can kind of see yourselves in these characters, and you can kind of see events that have happened, through these movies, and kind of, draw parallels, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think as time progresses, we'll talk a little bit about that later. I feel like that kind of diminishes. But one thing that I think really helped out Star Wars was that there was always this plan. And also, what's really interesting is how George Lucas wrote up the movies. He always wrote it on a notepad. I remember I seen it in the documentary. So it's like his hand must have had carpal tunnel or something. But there was always this plan to fulfill things that had happened previously and that was set up. Unfortunately, the sequels, it's like you're in new territory, and we'll talk a little about that later in the next episode. But yeah, do you have any other thoughts?
Oh, I did want to ask you, what was your favorite movie from the original trilogy?
Good question. I would probably have to say it's tight. It's between Empire Strikes Back and The Last Jedi. I like The Last Jedi a lot, though. I just like the fighting scene between Darth Vader and Luke.
You mean Return of the Jedi?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Return of the Jedi. Yeah, these damn names. Yes, Return of the Jedi. Sorry, everybody. Return of the Jedi. There was like this beautiful song that they played that was like very sad. And it kind of paralleled to Battle of the Heroes in a way, like, but they changed it up. It was really cool. Probably The Last Jedi, I think. Although that was like sometimes pretty cheesy, like the Ewok. The little Ewok things. They were cute, but sometimes there was like a little, this feels very like late 80s. But probably Return of the Jedi. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah. No, I agree. I used to be a conflict of interest sometimes. Maybe I'm more biased, but I think I like Return of the Jedi more. I used to be big into Empire Strikes Back. That used to be the one I always watched, because I actually had it in my DVD collection. Because I didn't have all the movies, so that's the one I would go to the most. And I think I love that because I love the Dagobah scene where Luke actually like sees himself in Darth Vader. But Return of the Jedi is the one that I actually love more, and it's the one that breaks my heart because now it's like when I see the sequels, it's like I see them and it's like they tried to make something they tried to reinvent the wheel, basically, because I think Return of the Jedi ended perfectly, right? It was the conclusion of, at the time it was supposed to be a 6-movie saga with the prequels. And I think it ended perfectly with Darth Vader's redemption. And that's why I have gripes with the sequels as well, because it's like you try to make that in vain, kind of, with Rey. But we'll talk more about that in the sequels. But I always loved Return of the Jedi because it was about, Darth Vader's redemption, and kind of like people always go back and forth about who really was the chosen one. Was it Luke or Anakin? I still say it's Anakin. I think Luke was a conduit or a catalyst for his redemption, but Luke is still an important character as well, right? And I always love that scene where they were talking and in that hallway scene, and Luke is trying to bring him back to the light. And I think now it actually weighs more watching all these newer properties and watching Revenge of the Sith. It just kind of adds a weight to that one scene where it's like Darth doesn't talk, but like you can still feel like the burden that he had talking to Luke. But yeah, that's one of my favorite movies.
Beautifully said, man. Wow. Okay. Do you have any other final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody should start with the original trilogy first. I always recommend people who are getting into, the big Star Wars franchise, because I know it's very daunting and it's a big franchise. I say always start with the original trilogy, and that's how people watched back then. I think it's important. It sets the tone for everything, right? It might be a little slow in the beginning, but it'll pick up and you'll kind of go back to it as you watch more properties, right? Even if it's out of order, like some people prefer to watch it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? But I think New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, those cement the foundation for the franchise.
Okay, well, you heard it here, everybody. Well, listen, everybody, if you made it to this point of this video, we want to thank you so much. Please make sure to actually like the video, help our channel out. We're not finished just yet. We are going to revisit the prequel trilogy and then the sequel trilogy. So stick around for that. That'll be linked down below. Guys, check out our other playlists as well. We do plenty of reviews if you're new to the channel. And thank you so much for a lot of the comments. We've received a lot of comments for like different reviews and stuff. So thanks for all the love. We appreciate you. Dylan, take us away.
Yeah, and we also have Star Wars Visions coming out as well. So we'll be doing a review for that. Check out our other playlists. We do plenty of reviews for Marvel, Star Wars, DC, all your favorite shows, and a lot of new independent movies and shows as well. Yeah, check us out. Until then, may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you. See you guys.